massive frauds in the City of London. Gordon Bowden, over to you.
Okay, the alternative investment market was a derivative of the London Stock Exchange, which was specifically launched in 1995 or 96 for small, and I state small companies, to be able to float shares in public listed companies. And what it turned out to be was a massive casino where well-to-do syndicates and well-appointed people were allowed to exploit this unregulated avenue to commit corporate espionage. That corporate espionage is conducted where directors of public listed companies steal the cash from the raised capital by selling block shares and shares on to banks, financial institutions and private investors. And then over a period of time they get issued with free shares as directors and then manipulate the share price in order to conduct director insider trading. There are at least...
And there's no cap on the number of shares per company that you can issue?
No, well, there is a cap. There is a cap. Most of the companies, like the ones I've exposed, they're nothing more than Ponzi scams in the Falkland Islands. They included the now collapsed Desire Petroleum, which I warned the market about for at least 5 years ago, that it was a Ponzi scam. The other one is Falkland Oil and Gas. The other one is Rockhopper Resources. The other one is Border and Southern, and the other one is Orca Exploration. These companies are all intertwined with common directors that use one drill rig at the moment, which is a submersible drill rig, which is supposedly drilling for each company. However, that drill rig is called the Ocean Guardian. Now, if you do your research, as I have done, that drill rig was once owned by George and Jeb Bush, which tells a story in its own. And these are what they are. This is an industry that floats private listed companies with thousands of shareholders where the directors are nothing more than thieves. But they're really clever thieves because they work with complicit auditors, accountants and lawyers. These are the people that asset strip banks. They do so by selling cheap shares, block shares, to Royal Bank of Scotland, Barclays, Lloyds Bank, HSBC, any bank which will be complicit in purchasing these worthless shares, which are then offered to its own clientele.
And can you confirm for me, something that I think you've told me about before, which is that the banks which profess to be funding this are actually a pool of toxic debt, which they extend by making a toxic loan into the sector with every issuance of shares. So it's literally giving the directorates and the executives in the corporations the chance to print money for themselves.
Well, it's clear because the Royal Bank of Scotland and any bank that's run at the deficit, I'm not a banker, all I am is a very astute investigator when it comes to corporate espionage and looking how they stole the money in the first place. And when you see hundreds, thousands of companies dissolve on various stock exchanges, you could go to Poundland and get a notebook and a packet of crayons, list all the directors of those companies, and you would end up with looking at the same directors who are allowed, don't ask me how they're allowed, to raise company after company after company that dissolve, owing hundreds of millions to our banks. Now, when the banks reported to the general public that they had lost, 40 billion pounds, no one asked the right questions to the directors of the banks. And those should have been, yes, we have a toxic debt of 200 billion pounds, but they never asked the right question to where did that money go and to which companies did it go. And when you find out, it turns out it's exactly the companies that I have said that are currently listing and delisting on the alternative investment market. It's a casino. It's a casino for money laundering and even for the mafia. The mafia are known to use the alternative investment market because I will state publicly that Tessa Jowell's husband, David Mackenzie Donald Mills, was indicted in the Italian courts for money laundering for the Italian Prime Minister, Silvio Berlusconi, and the mafia.
And Tessa Jowell is?
Labour. But nobody asked our government, and there was no inquiry by our government, to interview David Mackenzie Donald Mills or do a dismantlement of all the Ponzi scam companies that he was allowed to run through the City of London. And that was specifically 788, 790 Finchley Road, and others named in the Italian courts. But our government, because they know that they're all complicit in hiding this fact, that it's nothing more than a massive washing machine for organised crime money, have never brought these people to book, because they're all at it.
And can you, with your international perspective, fill us in on how they set about internationalising the stock? So I assume that in every stock market around the globe, that companies like Cairn, which is a fraud in the UK, it's a fraud in India, but they market their products in stock markets in almost every country where there is a stock market. And
look, let me just simplify it, George. Cairn Energy is the main parental company. When you do corporate dismantlement using their AIM admission to trade 26 document, what you will find is that when you look at the substructure or group structure of Cairn, you will find that there are 50 to 60 subsidiaries which you never hear of, which are all dormant or just shells. And what they do, specifically the manner and the modus operandi for asset stripping a company is very simple. What you do is you set up a subsidiary company, which the parental company lends 50 to 60 million to conduct drilling operations or search exploration. And what that money then does, it then gets written off. It's moved out to the parental company, to the subsidiary company, and then is written off. In effect, it is sabotaging corporate espionage of a corporate's cash and share assets. And this is very easy to dismantle and to prove where that money goes. But these people are very clever. They are constructed by boiler room experts who work for these companies, and these dignitaries, we call them, right honourable people who are listed as directors of these corporate entities. And what you find out is that as money is moved to subsidiaries which are listed in the British Virgin Islands, Panama, Barbados, Channel Islands, Northern Cyprus, just where Andrea Davis.
So the havens I knew about, but it's the issue of the, the multiple stock markets around the world. They've got a new one in Iraq, they've got a new one in Lebanon. Everywhere we brutalise, they replace what used to be the issuance of money by that country with a stock market and with absolute control over the central bank in that region. So they've got the control of the issuance of money and the issuance of virtual money, which is absolutely undermining the integrity of the companies that they profess to be funding.
Yeah, look, if you understand how corporates on the AIM work, you will see that they are dual listed. That means that they can list their corporate under a very similar name with a slightly different name. Instead of company, it will be corporation or Inc. And what you will see is that they will then list on the Toronto Stock Exchange, on the Australian Stock Exchange, and the German and the JSE in South Africa. In doing so, they can then operate transfer of capital legally of Forex and shares from one company to another. Now, unbeknown to the general public and to the little private investor shareholders, these corporates are purely set up to asset strip. They're not designed for the benefit of the little private investor. So you can have companies listed on the alternative investment market which are dual listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange, the Australian ASX, and various other minuscule stock exchanges. And all they do is use the subsidiaries as vehicles to conduit stolen cash, and then create a doorstop for people who are trying to investigate the money trail. And when you start looking at the British Virgin Islands, Toronto Stock Exchange, and the Channel Islands, what they've done is create a door slammer for the Financial Services Authority and the Tax Authority to go and chase the money. Because that money that's sent to those obscure places then get divvied up into shell accounts that nobody knows about, because there's no and you can't get access to that as a public citizen in the UK. And so the money trail ends. It is our government's lack of due diligence and the people who are laid down to protect the interests and the assets of this country who are complicit with these people. People like, and I will name publicly, when you get people like Peter Hain as an MP or Peter Lilly, you will find out that these are directors of virtual companies. Peter Hain is in a mining company called Amara Mining, which is actually a derivative of, what's that gentleman's name? Clough Mining.
Oh, Algae, yeah.
Yeah, Algae Clough. And so when you check the corporates that's for Amara Mining and recover the documents, you'll see it's changed name about 4 or 5 times. But all the money that's gone in there from banks and private financial institutions has all been laundered to other companies, and they run it at a toxic debt, or the bank calls it a toxic debt.
And you and I were talking about the industrial prosperity of nation states like Great Britain, in inverted commas, the other day. Can you briefly describe the impact of this issuance of money to the director classes and the selling off of Britain's industrial viability?
Look, with my life skills as a Royal Air Force engineer and a mining engineer, what I was given is a gift of experience in understanding the forensics of engineering and complex engineering material, which is used by the Royal Air Force and in the mining industry. And I've used the same skills to dismantle companies, understanding what each part plays in the overall structure of the company. And then when you can look at the assets, and with my mining experience, is to overview these cheap assets that they purchase, undervalued assets. And then when you look at the historical records of these assets they call them, is you find that they're nothing more than worthless junk. But people have paid, 50, 60, they say 50, 60 million for that. In actual fact, when you check back the history of the purchase, sometimes they purchased for $1 or £1 with liabilities. And then they use a running debt facility to further fill the kitty and rob it. It's Robin Hood all over again.
So I'm just pointing my camera at an image of the Future of Russia Foundation, which has got Henry Alfred Kissinger on it, a number of Rothschilds. It's got a royal presence as well. And we know all about the Oxford Russia funds and all about the globalized monetary systems that we now have. So my question really was, can you see a future for the country if the politicians continue to behave like they are behaving? They are behaving as cheap shot thieves, and they are stealing from our own treasury. There are no tax implications of anything you've talked about so far. None of that money comes back to the inland revenue, and our children are now being asked to pay £50,000 to £60,000 in student fees to have a jobless future. The Oxford Russia Fund is run by Lord Patton, and the manipulation of the globe is coming out of the White House and the Westminster governments, along with the other G8 leaders. None of it is an accident. All of it is calamitous for the GDP and the actual industrial output for those countries, they don't give a shit as long as they get the personal coffers lined. Is that a good way of summing it up?
Well, it is, but what you're looking at is a transcontinental syndicate of people, well-heeled people, members of Parliament, members of the House of Lords, and their partners in Australia, Canada, and even in Russia and China.
And the monarchies in Spain, in Holland, and in the UK.
Because, all right, maybe they're innocent in as much as they're not really interested in where they get their money from. And, you know, you can also stick your hand up and say, I didn't know. However, there is no due diligence in this country to investigate thoroughly the operations of thousands of virtual oil, gas and mining companies. Scotland has a chance in the next year or so to thoroughly expose those operations that even operate out of 50 Lothian Road. And when you 50 Lothian Road, sorry, in Edinburgh, and understand that companies like Cairn Energy and Capricorn, and where Malcolm Rifkin is also involved in corporates with G4S, is to look at boiler room operations and how they operate. And it's a very simple method of identifying corporate boiler rooms, where these infrastructures, where they contain thousands of companies of these corporate entities that have no business address other than a mail forwarding address.
Thank you for mentioning. I'm going to stop soon because we're 16 minutes in now. But on that issue of 50 Lothian Road, I would like to point out that at a political meeting on the impending referendum in Scotland, I was asked a question of John Lamont, my MSP for Scotland, and a chap called Paul Wheelhouse. The chair of the meeting, who was wandering around the aisles taking questions through the microphone, was Councillor Rory Stewart from Jedburgh. He allowed me to ask one question which was never answered. I was on the fraud at 50 Lothian Road in Edinburgh, where you've got massive Ponzi schemes involving Cairn, involving Abraxa, and involving overlapping directorships for the chair of the Arms to Iraq inquiry, John Chilcot, Anthony John Chilcot, and Rifkind, who was in 2002 the Foreign Secretary in the lead-up to the genocide there. I was not allowed to ask another question, even if I wrote it down. The politicians said they were aware of our email correspondence on those issues, but they were unprepared to talk about it. They are complicit in the crimes, and in British law that makes them guilty of being criminals within the circle. So that is John Lamont, MSP, and Rory Stewart, local councillor for the Jedburgh district. They were running the...
Is he in any way related to Norman Lamont?
No, not to my knowledge. And they're all relatively innocent people, but they are not. I was not even allowed to ask the question on what is the total running cost for the Scottish nation as things stand, and how will you issue that money in the new nation. They have not got a clue. There is not the word Treasury in the new 700-page document for an independent Scotland. And if we can stop now, because that's a 20-minute video now.
Can I just...
Yeah.
In this video one, can I just point out, for anybody that views this video, they should always ask themselves, with the click of a right digit on a mouse, they can use any search engine they want and find out one of the biggest scandals of British political history is that if they understood the background to a press lockdown case, which is the Carroll Foundation Trust, the asset stripping of over $1 billion of the corporate assets of Gerald Carroll, and the involvement, and I say the involvement, of our Right Honourable David Cameron, his late father, Ian Donald Cameron, and Lord Norman Lamont. Anybody can search that. It is in a total press lockdown by the FBI and the City of London Police. And these are the people who might take us to another excursion into Iraq at the cost of many of my comrades from the Royal Air Force, the Army and the Navy, to sacrifice to line the pockets of a few. Anyway, we can end
I think we'll stop there and we'll take on another topic, but thank you for your insight and your immense courage in confronting this. None of the paid professionals will do it. Thank you, Gordon.
A pleasure.